Good morning, folks. This is Brother Allen with Bible Commentary. This will be part 2 of the second coming of Christ in the Corinthians. Today I will be commenting on the judicial character of the day of the Lord that is in Corinthians 4, verse 5, and Corinthians 5, verse 5. Corinthians 4. Therefore, judge nothing before the time until the Lord come, who shall bring to light the hidden things of darkness, and will manifest the counsels of the hearts. And then shall every man have his praise from God. In 1 Corinthians 5, verse 5. That the Spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord Jesus. In both these passages, the parousia is represented as a time of judicial investigation and decision. It is the time when characters and motives shall be disclosed, and every man receive his appropriate need of praise or blame. The apostle deprecates hastily and ill-informed judgments, apparently not without some personal reason, and exhorts them to wait, excuse me, to wait till the Lord comes. Does not this manifestly imply that he thought they would not have to wait long? Where would be the reasonableness of his exhortation if there were no prospect of vindication or retribution for ages or millennial to come? It is the very consideration that the day is at hand that constitutes the reason for patience and forbearance. In like manner, the case of the offending member of the Corinthian church points to a speedily approaching time of retribution. St. Paul argues that the effect of present discipline exercised by the church may prove the salvation of the offender in the day of the Lord Jesus. That day, therefore, is the period when the condemnation or salvation of men is decided. But on the supposition that the day of the Lord Jesus is not yet come, it follows that the day of salvation has not come either for the apostle himself or for the Christians of Corinth, or for the offender, whom he calls upon the church to censure. All this clearly shows that the apostle believed and taught the speedy coming of the day of the Lord. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 29 and 31, But this day, brethren, the time henceforth is short. The time that remains is short, in order that both they that have wives be as though they have none, and they that weep as though they wept not, and they that rejoice as though they rejoiced not, and they that buy as though they possessed not, and they that use this world as not abusing it. For the fashion of this world is passing away. No words could more distinctly show the deep impression on the mind of the Apostle Paul that a great crisis, a great catastrophe was near, which would powerfully affect all the relations of life and all the possessions of his world. There is a significance in this language, as spoken at that time, very different from that which it has in these days. These are not the ordinary platitudes about the brevity of time and the vanity of the world, the stock commonplaces of moralists and divines. Time is always short, and the world always vain. But there is an emphasis and an urgency in the declaration of Paul, which imply a specialty in the time then present. He knew that they were on the verge of a great catastrophe, and that all earthly interest and possessions were held by a slight and uncertain amount of time. It is not necessary to ask what that expected catastrophe was. It was the coming of the day of the Lord, already alluded to, and the near approach of which is implied in all of Paul's exhortations. Alford correctly expresses the force of the expression, the time is shortened. Henceforth, meaning the interval between now and the coming of the Lord, has arrived at an extremely contracted period. But unhappily, he goes on to treat the opinion of St. Paul as a mistaken one, since he wrote the unfolding of God's providence has taught us more of the interval before the coming of the Lord than it was given to an inspired apostle to see. What the private opinion of St. Paul might be respecting the date of the second coming of Christ, or what would take place when it did arrive, we do not know. And it would be useless to speculate. But we have a right to conclude that in his official teaching, he was the organ of a higher intelligence than Paul's own. We are really not competent to say how far the shock of the tremendous convulsion that took place at the end of the age may have extended. But everyone can see that the exhortations of the Apostle Paul would have been peculiarly appropriate within the bounds of Palestine or Israel. As we pursue this investigation, the area affected by the parousia seems to grow and expand. It is more than a national, it becomes an ecumenical crisis. Certainly, we must infer from the presentation of the apostles, as well as from the sayings of their master, that the coming of Christ had significance for Christians everywhere, whether within or without the boundaries of Judea. It is more seemingly to inquire that the true import of the doctrine of the apostles on this subject than to assume that they were mistaken and invent apologies for their error. If it be an error, it is common to the whole teaching of the New Testament, and will meet us in the writings of St. Peter and St. John. For they also, no less than St. Paul, declared that the end of all things is at hand, and that the world is passing away, and the lust thereof. That's 1 Peter 4, verse 7, 1 John 2, verse 17. The end of the ages already arrived. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. Now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition upon whom the ends of the world, or the ends of the age, has arrived. The phrase, the end of the ages, is equivalent to the end of the age, that age, and the end. They all refer to the same period, the close of the Jewish age or dispensation, which was now during their lifetime at hand. It will be observed that in this chapter, St. Paul brings together some of the great historical incidents which took place at the commencement of that dispensation as affording warning to those who were living near its close. He evidently regards the early history of the dispensation, especially insofar as it was supernatural, as having a typical and educational character. These things happened unto them by way of example, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the end of the ages are come. This not only affirms the typical character of the Jewish economy, but shows that the apostle regarded it as just about to end. Conybeare and Howson have the following note on this passage. The coming of Christ was the end of the ages, the commencement of a new period of the world existence. So nearly the same phrase is used in Hebrews 9, verse 26. A similar expression occurs 5 times in Matthew, signifying the coming of Christ to judgment. This note does not distinguish with accuracy which coming of Christ was the end of the age. It is the parousia, the second coming, which is always so represented. That event was therefore believed to be at hand when the end of the age or ages was declared to have arrived. It is sometimes said that the whole period between the incarnation and the end of the age or the end of the world is regarded in the New Testament as the end of the age. But this bears a manifest incongruity in its very front. How could the end of a period be a long, protracted duration? Especially, how could it be longer than the period of which it is the end? More time has already elapsed since the incarnation than from the giving of the law to the first coming of Christ. So that, on this hypothesis, the end of the age is a great deal longer than the age itself. Into such paradoxes, interpreters are led by a false theory. But as is true theory in science, every fact fits into its place and lends support to all the rest. So in a true theory of interpretation, every passage finds an easy solution and contributes its quota to support the correctness of that general principle. Folks, I'm going to stop here. This is part 2 of the second coming of Christ in the Corinthians. Next time we will be presenting part 3, the resurrection of the dead. Until then, may God bless us all.